back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast. Sorry we didn't have an episode last week. I was ill.
How rude.
It was, well, how rude of the virus, really.
Oh, no, it's goodness.
It was very upsetting. Yes, I didn't have a good start to the day. When we usually record on a Friday, it was up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Brutal.
It was not pleasant. Very unpleasant stomach pain.
No.
But welcome, Tim, to the podcast. We're back.
We are back because we wouldn't know what to do without you. Because, I mean, what would we do?
I don't know. That's a question to ask you, not me. What would you do without me?
Not record a podcast, obviously.
Yeah,
That's
obviously.
what we would do.
Well, Stu's not here today because he's got a very special meeting.
He does, yes. He had to duck away.
Yes, like a duck. Wait.
Walks like a duck, smells like a duck.
Yeah. What is it? It is a duck.
It is a duck. Yeah.
But isn't there another metaphor with ducks? Is like to talk about someone's calmness. That it's like it's all calm on top of it, but their legs are going feverishly underneath.
Yep. The
Wow.
graceful swan. That sort of looks like it's gliding across the pond, but actually there's a lot of work going on underneath.
I would describe you as a graceful swan.
Oh, thank you.
Swan Lake.
Sometimes a black swan, but that's okay.
You what? Sorry?
A black swan? Is that?
Oh, isn't that a bad event or something?
Black swan is
unforeseen.
Because if you are English, before you have made it down to the Antipodes, then you just assume that swans are white, and to be white is to be a swan. To be a swan is to be white, and it's not until you end up in Western Australia, there's like, hold on a sec, there's such a thing as a black swan. That's unprecedented. We don't expect that. So black swan event is you assume everything is this way because that's the only way it's ever actually been, and all of a sudden something radically different comes along and shows itself to be true, even though you wouldn't have thought so.
Kind of like this podcast.
Coming along. You wouldn't have thought that three guys talking about ministry would actually make how many episodes?
I think we're at 150. This might be 152nd.
Oh, who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
But it's a black swan event.
When you hear it, for the first time. Woof. What's this?
What's that?
Look at this. Three old guys talking about ministry.
Talk about yourself.
Yeah, I am. I feel old today because I'll tell you why. Cultural artefact.
Cultural artefact.
I'm glad you brought that black swan event.
Yeah,
up there.
You had a black swan event this week?
Well, isn't that, not necessarily, but I think it might relate to what we're talking about today. Having said that, last night I have 3 children. My son is 10, my daughter is 8. They're both at public school. And my daughter Remy, she's not at school yet. She goes to preschool. But the 2 oldest had what they call a mini musical at their primary school last night. And it's really cool. Like it's very impressive how much effort the teachers put in to make this happen. And so it's all the performing arts students that have done either dancing or band or what else do they involve acting in this, and they put it all together. So my daughter, for example, did dancing all year. She had a particular dance that she's performed in other places. They use the same costume, but they adapt it to the story. Yeah, great. But the principal basically writes the script, and there's other people that contribute to it, but she writes the script. And she thanked her, at the end of the event last night, she thanked her family for being involved in script writing dinners, which was pretty cool. That's cool. But they put it all together. So my son plays in the band. And so the idea was The Genie and the Lost Lamp. That was the name of the musical. But can you remember what Disney movie that comes from?
Well, I'm assuming Aladdin.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my favourites, I must say. The original Aladdin. I do not like the new live action Aladdin very much.
No, I didn't either. Except for the one actress, I don't know any names, but the new character, because they didn't put in a talking tiger, so is Jasmine's offsider. Oh, yes. Whatever her name was, she was hilarious.
I can't remember.
But everything else about that was terrible.
It was upsetting also because it was directed by Guy Ritchie, and I like all of Guy Ritchie's films. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, which is probably, but the real one for me is The Genie.
You can't top Robin Williams. I mean, that's the problem. He's a genius, absolute genius.
He's so good at that. And apparently, I've seen some clips on YouTube and stuff that he improvised almost half the script.
Well, I've heard, fun fact, that Aladdin, the original cartoon, was ineligible for Best Picture. best script. Anyway, one of the Academy Awards.
Yeah.
Because so much of it was improvised by Robin Williams that it doesn't count as a published document. And so they couldn't give it an award. They couldn't even nominate it because so much of it had been improvised. So
wow,
there you go.
And you can tell it's been improvised. So I have memorised the entirety of that first part of the original Aladdin, the guy at the marketplace.
Yes. Yeah.
And now...
Come closer. Oh, not that close.
Not too close, a little too close. There, welcome to Agrabah, city of mysteries, of enchantments. Anyway, I memorised that when I was in primary school. And now, because the kids are doing related to the musical that they were in last night, we watched Aladdin last weekend, which is great, the original Aladdin. But it wasn't just Aladdin. It starts with the genie and the lost lamp, but then they go through different times and different spaces in different Disney movies. They go back to the future, so they involve Back to the Future in there. But they do that to involve all the dance groups. So all the dance groups are part of it. And then they have narrators. So there's not a lot of voice acting, but they're acting up on stage while they're narrators, which are chosen from different years to narrate the story. So it's really fun. I mean, it's primary school. It's not the greatest production in the world, but for what they've done, I think they had 90 children audition to be in it.
Oh wow!
And they had lots of children involved in it, it was fantastic. I had a great time. Primary
school concerts can be both the best and the worst. It's really, really sweet, and there's lots of really good things that happen. And particularly when your kids are involved, you're just really proud of them. You're just like, oh, this is awesome. And then there's always the part where they get all the year one kids that have been learning recorder to come and play Let It Go, and it's it's awful.
Yeah, there was no recorder.
There was no recorder. That's good.
I appreciate it. I don't think they do recorder at my kids' school, which is
you've
lovely.
Been saved.
Yes, but shout out to the teachers. I won't name the school, but shout out to the teachers.
Yeah,
they did a huge amount of effort, and I had a really great time. And they had a video in the middle where they're like, has anyone seen the lamp? Like someone calls the school and the office ladies answer and they're like, yes, hello. And they're like, I've lost the lamp. Can you tell me, so Jasmine calls the school and is like, I don't know where the lamp is. And then they call around the school and they got all the teachers involved in the video too, which was really fun.
That's really fun.
And so my son's teacher, he likes to do big speeches and stuff. And the shot was, or the scene for him was he was talking about, so in the Middle East, and then all the children are falling asleep because he likes to go on a long diatribe about something. And he's like, because it's related to the lamp. And anyway, it was really good. And yes, I was, last year when I went to it, I was pleasantly surprised. This year, I'm like, this is going to be great. And it was good fun. Even like I said, my 4-year-old, she enjoyed it too. So that's our cultural artefact because it involves young children.
Yes.
But it does relate to the thing that we were talking about last episode. And which really struck me was the inbuilt transience that we kind of have in our society and how that's played out in children's and youth ministry as well, and later on the rest of the church. I think we kind of I said to you before, even before we were recording, that with school you've got that kind of thing. You move on. And in this musical, all the year 6 children were obviously, this is the last time we'll be here. And I was reflecting, I don't even remember, it feels like such a big moment when you're leaving primary school. Because you are, but also now you're like, oh, it didn't really matter that much. But at that time, it's such an important thing. So then you've got, as you get older, and Stu's talked about this last episode, even in high school, you don't just have one class. You're in many different classes, many different people, many different teachers. And so as you keep moving on, it's almost like you're almost trained to be in a situation where that's what life is. And that plays out sometimes with church, where we see people move on from church when they're like, oh, I just don't like this, or they're not as sticky at church. So the idea was to talk about that transience as well, but also in particular talking about a framework of theology, strategy and practice, and about how we're now up to the practice element of that, talking about youth and young adults and children's ministry. Got to get that right. So I suppose my first question, and we're always aiming to talk about how we can get stronger discipleship and missional outcomes. How do you think, and we can probably start with a Sorrowville perspective, but how do you think that some of the things that we do, in particular with our practice, does that influence or kind of mitigate or battle against that transience that we're talking about?
So you've kind of got 2 different types of transience that you're talking about there. So one is the flitting between different communities and not having roots in any particular one.
And stability, yep.
The instability. So sometimes that comes through parents' work. So there are particular jobs and careers where you might be moving regularly. So that might move a family around. And so if that's a Christian family, then they're constantly trying to have to find new church communities everywhere that they go. And so we've had a few of those types of families come through our church. You might just have, as you say, there's sort of preferential transients in that, this church no longer fits my needs, or rightly or wrongly, I disagree with, a particular aspect of this ministry. And so you leave a church that you thought you were going to be rooted in, and then you've moved somewhere else. And you might do that one time, multiple times, and people will go through that kind of period as well. My family did that. So we were at one church, so the church that I was sort of born into and baptised in, there was a point where my parents started to get dissatisfied with some of the leadership and the way that they were leading. And so they made the difficult decision. It was a church that they had been at for a very long time, well before they had kids. And so they had grown up there. They had their kids there. I think all three of us, I'm the middle child, so all three of us had grown up there. And we made the difficult decision to move. And we ended up then at Guymer, which is, where I got established with Guymer, and, Stu's dad was my Sunday school coordinator and all these kinds of things. So that's kind of where we made that move. So that's some kind of transience will happen there. But then the other thing, this is where the sort of primary school model comes in, is the idea that we have these institutionalized transition points.
Yeah.
And so there's preschool, there's primary school, there's high school, and there's a hard cut between those things. So particularly in our area of Sydney, you will have feeder schools, and because the public system is based on your geography. So wherever you happen to live, you go to that school, and they've actually made it more difficult in the last 5 or 6 years to go to an out of area school. So if you're within this geographic area and the lines are drawn, then you go to that local school, and it would be rare for you to go to a school outside of that. So you go to this primary school, that primary school, that primary school may or may not feed into 2 or 3 high schools, because again, the high school drawing of the lines is different to the primary school drawing of the lines. I don't know who decided that. But so when you grow up going to your local public school, kids from your local public school might go to 2 or 3 different high schools, then you'll meet with other ones from other primary schools. But there's this hard transition point. You might have some of those relational friendships that travel through with you, but it's also assumed that many of them won't. And then, of course, you add the complexity of other types of schools. So you've got selective schools, you've got specialist schools. One of my daughter's friends is leaving at the end of this year to go to a special performing arts school because she's a really high-level dancer, and the Christian school that they're at just doesn't have the resources to run a high-level dance program, and so she's going to a school that does have that. And so there's those kinds of things as well, and independent school systems. But when you have these hard transition points of I've graduated from primary school, and this is the area we're in now at the end of December, our school year in the Southern Hemisphere finishes with the calendar year. So I'm finishing primary school. I'm saying goodbye to all of my year 6 friends, all my year 6 teachers. I'll have a long summer holiday of, 5-6 weeks, and then I'll start brand new at a brand new high school where I have a small number of relational connections, but really that's kind of about it, and there's nothing else. And so that's kind of our culture of education when you go through those changes. And what has been typical of Western suburban churches throughout the last sort of 50, 60 years has been trying to mirror that in the church as well. So if that works well for education, we assume it works well for the church. And so we have preschool ministries, we have infants primary school ministries, we have youth ministries, we have young adult ministries. And sometimes we can also mirror that same kind of hard transition point. The children's ministry team ministers to K to 6, and then you graduate out the kids out of year 6 and you say, see you later, have fun at youth group next year. And then there's the 6 weeks of summer school holidays, and you come back and, a number of your friends may still be there, but there's a whole bunch of new leaders. You don't know them, they don't know you, and you've got to sort of start again. And the youth leadership team is thinking, we've got to try and scoop all these graduated. How do we do that? And so you create these points, and different churches have tried to find different strategies. And the one thing that you can, there's two things you can do. Relationships are really, really key. And we'll talk a lot about that because that plays into our theology and our strategy. And you can also create structural changes there as well. And so the structural changes that a number of churches do is try to start year 6 kids early into youth group.
Yep.
So that's a structural change. So we do that in term 4. So in term 4, we shift everyone up. And part of that is get used to youth group before you're in high school. Yep. There are other churches, a number of good friends are in churches where actually youth group is year 6 to year 12 or year 6 to year 10 or something like that. So your entire last year of primary school is done in youth group. And that again builds you into the relational capacity through the structure of early entry, I suppose. And so that break between primary and high school is actually intentionally not mirrored in the church to try and help sustain relationships through that long period where they're otherwise changing. So there's those kinds of things. But the key to all of that, and the thing that we want to talk about a lot today, is the importance of the relational connections. Because even those structural changes are trying to help facilitate a relational bond. And it really is the relational bit that's really, really key. That because the relational bonds are going to be really significant, particularly because, unlike school, you have a choice about whether you want to go to children's ministry or youth ministry. You don't have to go. You're not legally, no one from the absentee office for the Department of Education is going to chase you and say, why aren't you at youth group this week? Because you don't have to go, therefore we rely a lot more on the relational capacity of people.
Right. And so do you think, I think this is something else we touched on in the last episode, do you think as developmentally, like children and teenagers are going through this thing of constantly transitioning in their life, you think about primary school, you're in the same class with the same people, the same teacher, usually, and then you've got that 6-week break, and then you've got to do it all again. And then you've got to do it into a different, even to a greater degree at high school. So do you think that because they're developmentally like changing so much, like you grow so much as you change so much as a child compared to, for example, us as adults now.
Yep.
Is there a real role of the church to play in providing a really strong base of stability in those relationships for children and teenagers?
Yeah, so again, high school teachers do a brilliant job.
Yeah.
And the best high school teachers are building relationships with their kids, but they've got, many, many, many kids, depending on the size of the high school, to get to know. And they see them 5 1-hour periods in a week or whatever it is. And so there is a lot of change going on there. And so stability of relationships and networks of community are really key protective factors for kids' mental health, spiritual health, physical health, all those kinds of things. And so stable families is really, really key to this. And so we know that the stability of your family has a lot to do with how all of those different outcomes. And of course, we live in a fallen world, so we know there's a lot of kids who live in unstable families for a variety of reasons. But families are really, really key. And churches also have an ability to create those sort of stable communities for people as well. For a number of kids, school is the stable community. If home life is chaotic, and if they don't go to a church or they're not Christians or they have unstable church relationships, it might be that just the regularity of going to school, I'm there Monday to Friday, 9 to 3, every day, that creates a stability. So there is stable there. But yes, these formative communities that hold you, challenge you, and develop you, they're really, really key to a person's development.
And so then we're talking about that churches have kind of followed their educational model. And we don't mean to demonise the education system either, but the strange thing is that in terms of adopting that, and we've talked about homogeneous unit principle as well in terms of slicing and dicing our demographics of our church so much, that what it seems to have led to is lesser discipleship and missional outcomes. I mean, that's my observation, is that, and less of that strength of relational, because it's like it's infiltrated the church. And so the only thing left almost for children and young people is, in terms of that stability, is their family now, rather than having those two kind of pillars that are supporting their lives. Would you agree with that? Or I'm just trying to hypothesize here. Is that where you're seeing possibly happen?
Well, I mean, part of the history of the education is that it's an industrialised part of society. Yeah. And so there's a number of factors that play into that historically. So part of it is the public schooling in the West sort of grew up just a little bit behind the Industrial Revolution. And part of that was when life went from communities in villages to the city. Firstly, a lot of kids got involved in factory work, and you've got that stereotype of the chimney sweep, the little kids who can be sent up chimneys to clean up, and horrific numbers of deaths and whatever. And realise that child labour is really detrimental, and we should care more for children. And so child labour laws came in, after they'd been in factories and mines and chimney sweeps for a number of years. And so you couldn't put kids into factories. But at least one, if not both of their parents, are leaving the home to go to a place of work in order to, earn the food for the family. So we've talked about this before, but this dislocation of the home and the work. So this is where you start to get this third place stuff starting to come in. So whereas it had been all together in the village, your community, your life, your work, your family was all kind of within the household and within the little village that you're a part of. Whereas now you start to dislocate those three. So your home life is different to your work life in terms of geography, the place where you do these things. And often they need for your community life as well. Needs to be different. Becomes different as well. So kids aren't welcome in the first space. First space they're at home. Yes, in the first space. They're not welcome in the adult's second space. So what do you do with them? Well, so you get a lot of child advocates for child rights start to impose child labour laws, but then also education kind of flows out from that as well. The
Sunday school movement too.
Well, the Sunday school movement was kind of almost a precursor as well. So the Sunday school movement started before industrialised schooling and public schooling. There were still schools, but it was more the upper class and the elite that would school their children, whereas the working class wouldn't have those opportunities because it was expensive. So as decades went on, it was put into, we should be having government-funded education. And so the government takes that off the church's hands largely. So it was kind of the elite, it was often the religious, and then eventually the government catches up and says, we can do this, we'll look after the education. That in the process of the factory, you get this sort of industrialised model where you have an end product in mind, successful adult. And so how do we produce that? Well, we push them along the assembly line and they develop. And so it depends on the size of the school. Like if you're in a tiny country town, you might have K to 6 in one classroom because there's only 5 of them. And you might have high school, whatever, and they might be helping learn each other. But once you get to suburbs and cities, you have the capacity to differentiate learning. This is also in the mid-20th century, you get the rise of educational psychology as well. So Piaget is really big here. And so this idea that actually children are capable of different learnings at different ages. So therefore, that's a good justification for breaking down the ages even further. So Piaget sort of developmental psychology combined with this just assumed cultural ethic of a factory and assembly line ends up with these, very structured ways of doing school. So, I mean, there's lots of things to critique there, but also this was just what they knew how to do. They were just trying to work out how to best educate children to do it efficiently And this was kind of assumed that this was the best way of doing it. So the problem with that comes into the church is not necessarily, children do develop differently. They have different abilities, cognitively, psychosocially, language, linguistics. So there are different differentiation. And as we talked about a couple of weeks ago, was we uphold the importance of age specialised ministries, partly because of the developmental abilities of kids.
Yep.
So it's important for the 5-year-old to know about Jesus in language and concepts that a 5-year-old can understand, and a 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old. So that's really, really important. What we lose, though, is actually there's a growing awareness of what we lost in high differentiation was the community of difference.
Yep.
And so homogeneous age specialisation was good in some things, but the shadow of it was you actually lost any connection between those generations and between those ages. And so too high emphasis on over-specialisation means that you lose the community aspect of actually when the 5-year-old, the 15-year-old and the 50-year-old hang out with each other, they learn different things. And they have the ability to grow as disciples of Jesus in ways that are not purely cognitive because of there are other aspects of faith.
Yeah. And as a result, if we import that, it's going to affect their faith, or actually a faith formation at the very least, in different ways. And we're almost industrialising their faith formation.
Yes.
Which, I mean, it'd be too much to say goes against what the Bible says, but what's the biblical foundation of that I'm trying to find? Yeah,
well, I think the problem with that is that we've since the mid-20th century, we've come up with really sophisticated developmental psychology of how cognitive psychology works, linguistic psychology works, moral development works, and all these kinds of things. And we've uncritically mapped faith formation onto that as well.
I see.
So we've assumed that if you mature from, a gradient, you're increasingly growing, and full linguistic maturity happens at this age, or full moral development is achieved at 18 or 25 or 40 or whatever you want to say. Like, we've got all these models of gradation, of development, of all of these different things. And we've mapped faith onto that as well, relatively, sometimes uncritically, sometimes critically. But what it means is that we've assumed that if this is immature moral development here, and it becomes more mature as you age, if linguistic or psychosocial development is immature here and grows up and achieves peak psychosocial development at 40 or 80 or whatever, when we assume the same of faith, we say, well, a child's faith is immature, or even pre-real, not yet fully formed at 0, 5 or 15, and therefore a full faith development happens at 25 or 40 or 80. There is some truth to that in that we want to mature as Christians, and Paul talks about that, maturing in our faith, going from milk to meat and all those kinds of things. Yeah, sanctification. We should be becoming more like Jesus as we grow older. However, what it does, the downside of it is it assumes that there is something deficient and incomplete about children's faith. And I think that's where we have to pull up and say, oh, hold on a sec. The Bible talks about children's faith in a way that is real. So it's not incomplete.
Yeah.
And there are important things where, Jesus says, look to the child, like become like children to enter the kingdom of God. So there is something about the upside down kingdom that actually says, no, there is faith, real faith going on for young children. And it's a blurry mix in terms of they might not be able to articulate it because their linguistic development is still growing. Their psychosocial development is still growing. Their moral development is still growing. And so they may express it in ways that reflect their growing development. but it doesn't mean that faith is not real.
Yep.
And I think that's where sometimes we've underplayed children's ministry, particularly preschool, creche, but even primary school ministry. And we get excited, now they're 15, how good is it we can now do real ministry? Or, we're preparing them to enter real church and those kinds of things.
Well, like it's almost like we're saying they're not real Christians until a certain age. Like
Yes.
I mean, that's a little bit glib to say that, but it's almost like that's what we're saying. And we've almost done it unintentionally too, I think.
Yeah. And there is, it can come across subtly. It can come across in the structures that we do. Again, part of the argument between those who baptise infants and those who baptise teenagers or older children, a lot of it is, I want to wait for them to be able to make a decision of faith for themselves. And it's a complex theology, as all theologies are. There's lots going on there. Part of what's going on there is I don't want to baptise someone who can't yet express real faith, because I want to be able to hear articulated that there is real faith here before we give baptism. And you can pull verses out of that. You can, unless you confess with your lips Jesus Christ is Lord, those kinds of things. So that's true. But those of us who are more sort of infant baptism, particularly sort of a covenantal infant baptism, it's completely appropriate to baptise the infants of Christian families, because we're giving them a sign of the covenant. And actually the point of baptism is not you have passed the test, you can articulate this, therefore you now get the mark of, you've now succeeded as a Christian, or you've succeeded at articulating faith, and so therefore now we'll give you baptism. The whole thing about entering God's family is that it's a gift. And so we don't deserve it. And the 10-year-old who expresses faith, or the 15-year-old who expresses faith, or the 25-year-old who expresses faith, the Ethiopian eunuch who expresses faith still has a lot of learning to do.
Yeah.
So we're not waiting until they are fully cognizant. We're actually, because baptism is expressing a gift, and so we can baptise infants, I think is wholly in line. I think what's the language of the 39 Articles is most agreeable with the practice of the New Testament, because it emphasises this is a gift, it's undeserved, and who is most undeserving? The infant who is here, who cannot speak for themselves, who cannot articulate their faith, cannot do anything except receive, and that is a symbol of grace. Anyway, we've wandered a fair way off topic, but I think it kind of plays into this idea of children's ministry, youth ministry. I think one of the things we want to say today is that we are doing real ministry, even if it's with infants, preschoolers, children, and teenagers. As
you're saying, they are capable of a faith, but because it almost like saying we're saying it's only really fully formed when you can articulate it in the way that we want you to articulate it. And I think...
So that's a fallacy, yeah.
I think so.
Yes. So just that's clearing.
And as you would know that as working in children's ministry for a very long time, like I was just thinking, my youngest, like I said, she's 4, and I said, I just said at some point, like I was walking away from her, I said, I love you really very, very much, darling, or something like that. And then I was still walking away, she goes, but not as much as Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like my son, he had to choose do a project on an Asian country, and he chose to do Israel.
Right.
And he's like, that's because, and he had to have a personal connection. He's like, well, because I'm a Christian and Jesus is from that area. Yeah. Like they're capable of expressing that faith, whether it's in the way that we think it should be is the kind of
and I think that your 4-year-old, that's exactly right. Like that is her in a 4-year-old linguistic, psychosocial development appropriate way, expressing her real faith. Yeah. And so when we minister to your daughter and we engage her, we're not hoping that one day she'll become a Christian, fingers crossed. We'll just give her enough content so that she can make a decision for Jesus. It's no, as a 4-year-old disciple of Jesus, we are helping her to grow in her knowledge, love and obedience to King Jesus.
Yes.
And that's a really significant difference.
And I think all these things that we're talking about is really harks back to, and let's talk about Soul Revival's theology strategy practice in regards to this, is why we say that strategy is often the missing piece, because it's the hardest thing to figure out, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of thinking and a lot of living it out. And I think sometimes we see a lot of churches skip the strategy part and go theology straight to practice. But as we said, this episode in particular is about practice and how we do that, and thinking about the strategy being extremely influential on that allows us to be really flexible within that strategy of how we're actually doing it. So why don't we run through a few things, for example, that we really love doing at Soul Revival.
Yep.
If you're okay, I'll start with one.
Grow.
And talking about providing that stability that perhaps especially teenagers may not have, or feel they may not feel, they may be lacking it, but they don't really understand that or realise that they're lacking it, and something that you and I both grew up in is in Soul Revival's youth strategy, was to have the leaders lead as much as possible from the earliest stages of youth group until the very end of youth group. So that would be like that end of year 6, term 4, until the end of year 10. That would be the first.
Well, even sometimes often through to year 12,
right?
Even though 11s and 12s were going to Saturday instead of Friday nights, and would often then go on schoolies with them. So we do with church schoolies. So, and again, people come in and out at different points, but the goal, the aspiration was always that a group of leaders had a group of crew from term 4, year 6, all the way through to finishing their HSC, and then go and celebrate with them, and hopefully have grown over that time as well as they've missioned to their friends. And so it's been a growing group as well.
And we should say that was an idea that I think we adopted from Janelli Anglican, which is Cameron Hislop, I believe, had that original idea.
So a number of churches, so Cameron's been great at doing that and modelling that for many, many decades. And a lot of people will do some version of that because of this relational connection that you have. And
I don't think I realised the impact that, I didn't go to any other youth groups except Soul Revivals, but that the impact that had on me longer term was that I wanted to do the same thing when I went back into youth ministry too, and provide that long-term stability. And we were talking to Luca on a Chip Lunch podcast earlier today, and he was talking about the same thing of like, it's so rewarding for me now leading youth to be doing the same thing, providing a place where people can come and talk about Jesus, and we're meeting together to talk about Jesus, and we can do that in many different ways, but especially in a youth context, I think that's one that's been really, really fantastic for that. Do you want to expand though? Because I'd love you to use your son Micaiah as an example too. Now, as we've talked about before, we have the Friday gathering, which is our year 5 and 6 group meets first. Then we have dinner and a gathering in the middle as a connection point, and then we have youth afterwards. But your son Micaiah is also something we've implemented on the Friday gathering, has done what we call light leadership. Do you want to expand on that further? Because that's kind of linked to that longer term, helping young people be ready for a lifetime of ministry. And now he's actually doing a lot of the things that he was doing on Friday night on Sunday mornings as well. So do you want to elaborate on that? Yeah,
so part of growing a holistic Christian is helping them grow in their knowledge of Jesus, their love towards Jesus, and their obedience to Jesus. And so part of obedience to Jesus is obviously comes through all of your life, but an aspect of that is going to be how do you serve your community of God's people? And so the way that we've done this, and this is not unique to Soul Revival, there's lots of churches who do this, but is to have a junior leadership program. We call it light leading. And so it's kind of like light leading, but it's the light version. So it's you're not coming with all the responsibilities. You're still learning. You're still training. You're developing your leadership ability. And so we're careful to say, here's what you are doing. Here's what you're not responsible for. The things you are responsible for, not responsible for. Just because you're never going to be fully responsible for a group of kids or for doing this, or you will be given an appropriate level of ministry. And so we start that fairly early. And an easy place for that is in kids ministry. So once we want there to be a little bit of a break. So we don't put year 7s in leading the year 5, 6s, for example, because there's only 1 year difference. They're still mates, and it's harder for them to differentiate. I'm a leader rather than just a friend. And as while we talk about friendship as being a really key strategy, you also do need leadership as well as friendship. So and it's hard to differentiate that when you've only just left. So we say sort of year 9s can come and lead the year 5 and 6 group, because then there's that 2-year buffer in between. And so Micaiah and a number of his mates, when they started year 9, started leading with their year 5, 6 group. So they've seen a couple of crew through year 5 and 6, which takes Micaiah and his mates through year 9 and 10. So as the crew that they've kind of seen come through the primary school group graduate from primary school into high school, and they come along to the latter part of Fridays rather than the earlier part of Fridays, it's the same time that Micaiah and his cohort are finishing up our youth group on Friday nights and entering Saturday night late nights, which is for year 11s upwards through young adulthood, and also cycling back around to be light leaders in youth as well. And so he's been able to do sort of some leadership stuff. So he's done kids leadership now. He's starting to play around with some youth leadership now. And then the other thing he's been doing is, because we have that gathering, so basically a church service that is located in between kids and youth. So there's
on a Friday.
On a Friday. So we have year 5 and 6 kids club. We have dinner all together, church all together, small groups all together, and then youth group. So that hour and a half in between, there's lots of opportunities for all of those kids from year 5 up to year 10s plus their leaders to engage in other aspects of service. So because there's hospitality in there, they can be learning how to prepare meals, how to serve meals, how to help cook, how to do welcoming, learning how to just check kids in on the iPad, how to do all those kinds of bits and pieces. And then I was going to say, so then there's the gathering service aspect. Then there's all the bits and pieces there. So they're learning how to play in a band. So a lot of them have sort of learnt instruments, but now it's, that's great. You can play guitar in your bedroom by yourself. Brilliant. How do you actually play in the context of others? And also, when it's not a performance, it's a service. So part of learning to be in the youth band on a Friday night is learning both the heart attitude of, this is not about how good I am on a guitar. This is about me using my gifts to serve others. And I'm going to play to the best of my ability so that I can step out of the way and facilitate others praising God through song, worship God through song. So that's a really key, that's a big shift. And they're learning, they're light leaders, they're learning how to do that. They're learning how to do Bible reading. Again, how do I practice? How do I articulate well? And how do I do it not as a performance, but as an act of service? How do I pray out loud? Lots of kids might have devotional lives privately. They might be able to pray to God in their bedroom. But to write prayers, to structure them, to then stand up and pray to others, not in a performative way, but in a service way, that's hard as well. So we're training them how to do that. There's all the behind the scenes stuff. We've got sound, we've got projection. And so they're learning how to do the complicated sound desk, how to learn how to use the software that we use for production, how to put slideshows together, how to embed videos, how to do all those kinds of things. So they learn that on a Friday, and there's heaps of opportunity on Fridays to be learning to serve their community.
They're getting a taste, aren't they?
Getting a taste, and then a number of those teenagers, many of those teenagers, are also members of other congregations throughout the weekend, on Saturdays or Sundays across our different sites. And so they're experimenting on Fridays, but we don't want to wait too long before we want to help them to integrate with some of the other service teams. So my daughter, for example, she's 14. She's done singing and reading the Bible on Friday nights. On Sunday mornings, just last week, she did the Bible reading. And it started because we were short, and it was like, oh my goodness, we need someone short notice. And so I said, hey, Sally, do you mind jumping in and doing the Bible reading a couple of days before? She said, oh, I think so. And so, but also we want to build that not just as an emergency stopgap, but also as just, why not have Zali as one of the regular Bible readers on Sunday morning, where the majority of people there are not teenagers, unlike Friday nights. The majority of people there are older millennials, some Gen Xers, a couple of senior saints as well. So why not have Zali one week, a 40-year-old another week, an 80-year-old another week, then a 23-year-old. Like, reading, praying in the band.
And reflects our all stage strategy.
Absolutely. And so Micaiah he looks after the production software, the Proclaim. On Sunday mornings. And this term, he's like, I really want to get some of the year 7s, 8s involved in Proclaim. And I said, okay, well, how are you going to do that? He goes, well, if I just kind of teach them how to on a Friday night and Sunday mornings, and then I create a little roster.
Yep.
And so he's off his own bat, created a little roster of the year 7 and 8 kids so that he's teaching them how to do it. And we're starting to get them learning the sound desk as well so that we can help service those teams. And so it's helping them grow as disciples of Jesus by inputting into the community of faith that they're particularly part of.
And I think he's only able to do that, though, because of the relational aspect that he has and the relations he's built with those younger crew in the first place.
Yeah, so these are crew that he led through Fuse, our kids club. So he's led a number of them in year 5 and year 6.
Yep.
He sees them every Sunday morning. So there's a community on Sunday morning of families that he's kind of the oldest of that crew on a Sunday morning. So we've kind of the families who come, we've kind of got the oldest of the kids. And there's a number of younger families with primary and infants kids. And so he's hanging out with them a lot, grown to become friends with them. But it's also because he's received the ministry of Braden and Ethan and others on a Friday night who have said, hey, we want to teach you this. We want to grow you in these capacity as well. So, it continues to flow around as well. And a really good example of this, and the way it can encourage the whole church, is one of the things we've done regularly on Saturday night, and as we've got more and more teenagers on Sunday morning, that we do is we get them to hand out the trays of Lord's Supper. So we do Lord's Supper all together. Everyone gets a small crumb of gluten-free bread and a little thimble of juice, and we eat that all together. But to distribute that, we just have trays that get brought around, and we get the teenagers to do that. So we have to get a big bunch of teenagers to be the ones distributing that to everyone, while the pastor at the front is the one who sort of facilitates the experience. Not experience, that's the wrong word, the ministry, the service. But the other Sunday morning I did that. I had a whole lot of sort of year 6, 7, 8s delivering, and I had another guy, he would be sort of a young Gen Xer, empty nester. His kids don't come to our church, they go to another church. And he just came up to me and said, it's just so brilliant seeing those young crew serve us. It's such an encouragement to me to see teenagers participating in our service. And so, and in a very, very small way, it's fueling his faith to see that God is at work amongst the teenagers of our church. And he's able to see that because they are up the front doing real ministry. And so this is part of that joining in service, that intergenerational piece of bringing young people into ministry. It's partly for their benefit so that they are learning how to be disciples of Jesus. It's partly for the church's benefit that they get served by the church. And we're doing it in a way that gives them real ownership over particular ministries so that we could do the ministry without them. We don't want to. We choose not to.
And if we have to jump in, we can.
Absolutely.
If they can't make it or whatever.
Yeah. And there's no reason that, if we were really stuck on Sunday morning for Bible reader, there's no reason the preacher can't read the passage and then preach on it. There's no reason the service leader couldn't have read the passage and then, someone preach on it. We didn't need Zali as in like, oh my goodness, the service is not going to happen without her. We need Zali in the sense that we need her to grow as a disciple of Jesus. We need her to be practicing her faith in the context of the church. And we need the church to see that young people are not just the church of tomorrow, they're the church of today as well. And so we need her not from a practical point, but from a deeply spiritual, relational point in the way that we do church together.
And I think, I think you've hit all on the points of that. But so that's we've kind of talked about the practice of leading through all the years of youth ministry. We talked about light leadership and some of the other things we do around that, or why we do that. I want to hit on children's ministry, and I thought a good example of that would be Kids Chill. correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if there's many churches that do this, because we kind of we want to continue that relational piece of allowing our youngest of children to be able to form stronger bonds with safe adults that they'll see around in the church and have interactions with all the time. So do you want to explain the concept of Kids Chill? This is, again, another one of our practices. It's extremely, it's something we've done since the very beginning, but it is quite a flexible practice in itself, isn't it? But yeah, why don't you tell us about Kids Chill? I'll start with the fact that I get to be on Kids Chill and many other people get to get on Kids Chill, which means I'm not part of the teaching time, but I'm on a roster that rotates around however so often that I spend time with the youngest of our crew sometimes. I'm often in the youngest kids area.
Yep.
But yeah, let's start with Kids Chill and the thoughts behind that and why it's an essential part of our practice.
Yeah. So it started with trying to solve a very practical problem, which was when we first planted as a church, we wanted to have strong relational engagement with the leaders, the teachers of our children's ministry. So we thought the best way of doing that is to try and have the same people teaching every week. Mm-hmm. But when you're only one church, when you only got one gathering, you also don't want them to never go to church. So how do you have consistency of teaching with the ability for those teachers to also go to the gathering? And so we came up with the idea of saying, well, let's have a consistent teaching team, and we'll do that before our formal gathering time. So then during the gathering time, we'll have a different team. We'll have chill teams made up of as many safe adults as possible. And by safe adults, I mean those who can clear their working with children's check, safe ministry, etc. And we'll build little teams and they will rotate in every week. So this way, two really great things are happening with that. The first thing that's really great is that the kids get consistency in teaching. Because they get the same people embedded in their lives. This is really only worked on Saturday night. The other gatherings is a little bit different and there's practical reasons for that, but Saturday night works really well with this. So a consistency of teaching team every week. So that's great. That's the first benefit. The second benefit is during that chill time, the kids are engaging in relational play. And we call it chill because all you're doing is chilling with kids.
You're literally just making trains.
Yeah, that's right. Now, when I say all that you're doing, there's actually so much theology and sociology and developmental psychology built into that. There is so much going on that I could nerd out on for ages. But the key thing there is the kids are building safe relationships with a large number of adults in the church. And so you've got the benefit of both. You get the dedication of a small group of kids leaders and an expanding relational network of other adults that the children know. So if you think about it from the kids' perspective, here's my vision, right? My vision is an 8-year-old your daughter walks into church and she looks around at 100 people all having dinner together and she goes, I've played trains with at least half of these people. Yep. I know who they are. They know me. They know who I am, whose I am. I belong to them. They belong to me. Now, again, being 8, she doesn't have the language, the linguistic development yet to express that. But emotionally, there's something deep psychologically that she's able to look around and go, I know all these people. Yep. This is my family. I trust them. I can't remember all their names, but I know all of these people. And I've got very strong particular relationships with a small number of people there who intentionally word-based disciple me every week through teaching me, praying with me, singing songs with me, teaching me memory verses. So you get both of that. So that chill part is really key. And so the other thing that go all the way back to our comment at the start about transitions, that relational web that you're building through chill time, that there's a large number of adults in the church that are growing to know our young people and the young people are growing to know them, means that it actually doesn't matter when you graduate from preschool into infants into primary into high school out of high school into university or TAFE or the workforce. Like, actually, your community knows you all the way through that.
No, that's that solidity.
Yeah, and so you've got this stability of relationships that means that I may be graduating primary school. I might be the only kid from my primary school going from here to this high school here. All the teachers are new. All my friendships are new. the bus route is new or the walking route is new. That's all up in the air. But actually, I can go to church and in some ways, some things have changed because I go to a slightly different time on a Friday. But when I arrive on Saturday night or Sunday morning or Sunday night, actually this community of people has not changed. Yeah. They know me. Yeah. I know them. And that same person that discipled me really intentionally last year is still going to have morning tea with me or breakfast and sit down with a meal and say, hey, I've really missed you at kids ministry. How's high school going? Tell me all about it. Yeah. That's the vision. And we're still developing. I kind of paint it in utopian terms. And I have, students at college that it's like, this is an over-realised eschatology. It's too perfect. It doesn't actually work that way. And I said, no, it doesn't necessarily work that way perfectly, but we're building it and we're growing in it. And I had one of my students actually come to church last week, ex-student, she graduated a couple of years ago. But she was listening she came and she stayed for kids and then for kids chill and then for dinner, and we had lots of talks about these kinds of big picture ideas. And it was helpful for her, I think, to sort of see, that's what Tim's been talking about. I've heard you talk about Soul Revival Kids. I've heard you talk about chill. And after she says, it literally is just playing. Yeah. I'm like, it literally is.
It's not like playing games programmed or anything like that.
No, she was jumping in with Twister, and then she was playing. There's a game about it's kind of like a trivia game. I can't remember what it's called. About name 3 aquatic animals, name 3 mountains. Now these kind of things, and just playing it, just hanging out and drawing pictures and conversations.
Like I said, building train tracks.
Yeah, with the preschool kids, you're building train tracks, you're building cars. Yep. Sunday morning, there's a big culture of bringing your Matchbox cars, and some of the boys have these massive Matchbox car collector things that you can fit 20 cars inside, but it's shaped like a dinosaur, and it's like, it's brilliant. I love it. And so I get down the floor and drive around Matchbox cars and
awesome.
Yeah. And so all of that chill time, it is building our theology of the children of church of today, our theology that they can have real faith, our theology that we are a community of saints, the theology that I am friends with Jesus through the death and resurrection of Jesus. This 3-year-old is friends with Jesus through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Therefore, we are friends with each other as well as friends with Jesus. And so I can express my friendship. And I'm also honouring the child by saying, hey, 3-year-old, come and listen, come and join my world and be a friend with me. Actually, I'm the older one. I'm the more mature one. I can accommodate my own preferences, and I can go and colour in Sonic the Hedgehog colouring like I did a couple of weekends ago, because that's their world. Yeah. And so I enter their world. They get to direct it, and I show them that I care about them. I show them my friendship by colouring in Sonic the Hedgehog, or building train tracks, or playing Matchbox cars, or doing Twister with the older crew, or playing trivia games. That's how we enter this world. So the theology, the strategy ends up in this practice of very intentionally having safe adults form safe relationships with our young crew. Yep. So yes, that's a real key aspect of the way we do children's ministry.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's just 3 of the practices, and I think it's a good way to kind of wrap it up with this episode. But just as you were talking there, it makes me think of, there's that saying, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yep.
But we've almost, as we started the episode with, dislocated ourselves from that so much. And I think as I think about in Kids Chill, that is almost recapturing that village life of everyone gets to be part of a child being raised up, but also as a result, we're all doing it together as adults. Absolutely. And the teenagers are within that too.
Yeah.
And I think I know that's a lot of things that have influenced Stu's thinking of pre-industrial age. I know that same for you. And I think that's what is kind of really exciting, that because we are really strong on the theology and we're really strong on the strategy, that our practice allows us to do things like that, and to hopefully recapture some of the things that maybe that the world has kind of dislocated us from, but God has made us to be in community in that way. So I find that really, really exciting, and I think that's a really good way to finish. Is there anything you wanted to wrap us up on?
I was trying to find a book. There was like the whole idea of takes a village to raise a child. There's a book by Rachel Turner.
Yep.
Who I think is a UK children's family ministry person. So she's got a book called It Takes a Church to Raise a Parent.
Yeah, right.
Creating a culture where parenting for faith can flourish.
What a great title. I like it.
Yeah. And the design of the book says it takes a village to raise a child, and she's crossed out village, written church, crossed out child, written parent. But so my reflex to what you say, like it takes a village to raise a child, yes. And it takes a village to raise a teenager. It takes a village to raise a middle adult. It takes a village to raise, a senior saint in their last years of their life. Like,
and that is the shock absorber.
And that's the shock absorber. Like we've talked, I mean, obviously this series has been about ministry to young people, but like a key thing, keep pushing is this intergenerational, nature is our 85-year-olds, our 95-year-olds have not many years left this side of new creation for them. And yet they will benefit from their relationships with the 10-year-olds and the 13-year-olds. And, maybe a factor of how well you can tell your church is going in generational relationships. How many of your youth group turn up to the funeral of one of your senior saints? Like, have they been so wedded? And how many of your senior saints turn up to the high school graduations these are the kind of measures, because it is taking this village. We are doing it together, and it's the shock absorber in action.
Yep. Perfect way to finish. We'll be back next week, everybody. Thank you very much, Tim.
You're welcome, Joel.
Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. We really appreciate it. And if you would like to hear more about the practices of young people or how we use theology, strategy, practice to dictate how we do ministry, I would love to hear from you. You can email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au. And having said that, if you just want to drop a comment on the YouTube, that'd be amazing. And we'll be back next week. And we're going to talk about another area of ministry in regards to theology, strategy, practice. But we'll leave that on a cliffhanger to see what that is. It's a
mystery.
More because we haven't decided what it's going to be. But still, I hope you enjoy it.
Don't show how the sausage is made, Joel.
Oh, yeah, I will not. No peek behind the curtain here. But yes, thank you very much, Tim. And we'll always finish, as usual, with a one-way.
One way.